All right, we are live. So, hello, my name is Colin. Welcome to episode 3 of Roll by Roll's Tavern Talk, a show where we, the Roll by Roll gang, discuss various aspects of running a great D&D campaign based on our experiences with D&D 5e and our current adventures in Amathan homebrew. So, joining me tonight, we have the rest of the current roll by roll crew. We have Barry, who plays Nightingale and Landis. And we have Egan. Egan, who was unavailable last week, has rejoined us. Egan plays Douglin and Lafferty. So, with that, we'll get right into our topic with a little setup, as we always do. So, during our last Saturday Adventures in Amathan session, Egan and I got into a brief discussion about how Lafferty is going to go about creating more bullets and bombs, which are sort of Lafferty's main weapon, using his arm slingshot, his arm cannon. We haven't really come up with a name for it yet, but this is a process that Egan, you and I have been going back and forth on for a while. We hadn't yet really settled on how that's going to work, keeping in mind that Lafferty is an artificer and building things is really the DNA of an artificer. So, as an artificer, we figure that crafting these bullets and bombs should be faster and easier for him. So we kind of needed to homebrew something a little bit different than what's available. So with that in mind, today we thought we would talk about crafting magic items in D&D 5e. Specifically, what options are available out there and the pros and cons of those. Also get into a little bit about the specific of the homebrew way that we're going about dealing with Lafferty's crafting for our campaign. So I'm going to kick it off basically in the two core rule books, starting with the Dungeon Master's Guide, which was obviously the original way that crafting came around. Within that way of crafting, essentially you needed a formula, spell casting abilities, character level requirement, and then whatever materials, tools, and a location to work on that item. That was sort of the original way to craft. Start off with Barry, pros and cons of if we go back to the good old Dungeon Master Guide way of doing things.
Well, the Dungeon Master Guide has been the primal blueprint for a lot of the stuff that goes on in D&D. And I found that looking through the DMG, the biggest drawback that I came about was the time a lot of it was taking. And I think during the era that book was written, the game was a little worried about being magic heavy. So prior versions, magic was very plentiful. I know in 3.5 and earlier versions, everything you killed, you generally got some type of magic weapon and things like that. So I think as they moved forward in the game, those changes were made to kind of create a bit of a barrier unintentionally with the amount of time a lot of this stuff takes. But as far as the good, it's the bones that every other system I think moving forward were built off of. It's got a lot of great fail safes in there where you need a required level for certain spells. That way you're not overpowering the things you're making and things like that. So it's a good mix of both, but to me the biggest drawback from that original system was the length of time everything took to make.
Yeah, Egan, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think we were talking about this is that the biggest crutch to an artificer and keeping games flowing is how do you mitigate the time it takes to create magic items that are level appropriate, right? A lot of adventures, the clock is ticking. You have to get someplace. You don't have a week to sit down and get to things. So trying to come up with a a reasonable time frame. Obviously it has to be challenging. There has to be roles and things of that nature. But we found, at least in this game, the challenge has been the time. How do you integrate that into a game, and then making sure everything continues to flow, and yet the artificer can still do what they are supposed to do, which is make stuff.
Yes. So for me, with the DMG, definitely time. Guys, we were talking a little bit. I mean, a legendary item needed 20,000 days to create. We're talking close to 55 years. Um, Obviously, you're going to do that in downtime, but that you would need a very specific kind of campaign for that to make sense. Um, the other big con for myself with the DMG's method was it was very spellcaster centric. The main ingredient in creating a magic item was casting spells, and that required spell slots. And that made the creation of magic items very much a magic user ability. And I think that is why in Xanathars, which we'll talk to, they really moved away from that and said anybody should be able to craft magic items. We need to find a different way to approach this. So when Xanathar's Guide to Everything came out, we did indeed get a whole different way to craft. And I'll say right off the top here, this is generally speaking the method that I use. I like the way Xanathars approaches the creation of magic items. It very similar to the DMG in that you need a formula. And when we talk about a formula, you want to lay out things, a little description. You want to talk about what the rarity is, the CR range, what the cost is going to be, the time that it's going to create it. With Xanathars, then you need materials. And this is one of the things that I really like about the Xanathars method is it encourages you to turn the acquisition of those materials into a little side quest. Whether that's in a market or out in the wilds looking for those items, but it really gives you an idea to use that to flavor your campaign, where your character that wants to create an item actually goes out there and looks for those things. The formula,
Yep.
material, gold cost, time required, tools and skills proficiency. So very similar, but it took away the requirement for spell casting to be a key component, which then allows anyone to really craft. So Barry, your thoughts on Xanathars?
Xanathar definitely made some massive improvements. Like you were touching on before, the DMG, it was just a wizard who could craft magic items. And that really fractured that group that you're building. The wizard would have to go off, spend weeks and weeks and weeks by himself doing this. What's the rest of the group doing? Sitting around twiddling their thumbs in the keep, hoping he'll get done. Whereas Anathar came in and be like, okay, well, let's add a questing element where you have to fight a monster. Well, that brings the fighter into this. He's going to be pretty key. The ranger now becomes important because he'll track it down. The rogue, if you got to steal a certain ingredient without maybe killing the creature. Xanathar came up with a really clever way to have the entire group be a part of that process. And to me, that was a really cool element that they added in. But I also like where, having skills and tool usage become a major part of it, because how often do you find on a character sheet things like, oh, I have brewer's tools as a skill that I will never ever use? Well, this now allows you a chance to use those skills and maybe strive to acquire new ones that will help out in the creation of newer and different magic items.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Although
Very cool.
I will say that Gamero was brewing beer on the airship in Storm King's
That
Thunder.
is true.
So
That is true.
that's the first time I think I know brewers' tools were used. Egan, your thoughts on Xanathar's approach?
Well, I think like a lot of things in general about 5e is they have not allowed, they've encouraged the flavor aspect of this, creating things and questing for creating things and harvesting, monstrosities, an owl bear's beak, for example. It just again continues to allow immersion into this, and some might want it, some may not, but the fact that it's there and it's a system that makes a lot of sense, I think allows for a lot of enjoyability. I will say this: magic users usually aren't blacksmiths. So the fact that they were the only ones that could make a sword didn't make sense. Did they hire a blacksmith to make the sword? Why not have the fighter involved in that? Like they're there together, one is making the sword, the other's imbuing it as it comes out, or they treat the mix or the fire as a special fire. It didn't make sense for it to just be solely a magic user. And so when they've introduced this, also they introduced to me, a timeline that made a lot more sense. These are achievable items. Even legendary now, I think, has come down to where
Yeah,
it's, you know,
50 work weeks for a legendary item.
yeah,
So
I mean, and you
that-
still got to kill beasts that are CR 19, so it's not exactly easy. So
yeah,
I think it just again makes sense. And I again, first time playing an Artificer, I truly enjoy this aspect of it. Frustrations on setting up the system aside, but we're working that out, and that's I think why we're doing this episode tonight.
yeah.
But overall, just I think a much better method for sure.
Yeah, it's I'm glad you brought that up because the time frames within the Xanathar method are much more realistic. And I like what you touched on there, Egan, where 5e as a system creates a fantastic way to tell stories, right? And I think Xanathars tried to mold to that idea better, where it gave you a system where you could actually create a fantastic story around the creation of a magic item, with anyone being able to do it, but having to quest for the materials and things like that. That definitely gives you some better opportunity to add that into the story, instead of it having to almost solely be a downtime off to the side thing that is done. Because as a problem we have in our, and we'll talk about this a little, downtime is pretty rare in our campaign. So we definitely need a system that allows another way to deal with that. For myself, I just want to give a shout out to Flute's Loot for two absolutely fantastic articles on this topic. I won't lie, they were definitely my starting place to brush up on crafting. One's titled "How to Craft Magic Items: D&D 5e Ultimate Guide," and the second is "Formulas for Crafting Popular Magic Items in D&D 5e." And that was the first time I really looked at formulas, and Egan, something we've been working through with Lafferty's ammunitions. So we'll throw those links to those articles in the show notes there for anybody that's interested. So moving on. One thing we talked about as a group, I mean, in doing our research for this, just an absolute plethora of third-party crafting systems that are out there. Some of them are just absolutely amazingly detailed for a campaign that really wants to bring crafting to the forefront of what they're doing. For myself, one that I really enjoyed doing some reading in was Kibbles Crafting Guide. That's available on the DM's Guild. we won't get into too heavy detail on these. I know Barry, you have one as well. You'd like to kind of uh, talk to about, but this particular method talks about gives a lot of detail on how you can go about harvesting and getting the materials required for the crafting. Whether it's actually out there hunting for it, looting for it, buying it, whatever it might be. And then it broke crafting up into alchemy, poison craft, blacksmithing, cooking, which, I mean, you never think about it, but it is crafting in a way. Enchanting items, scroll scribing, wand whittling, leatherworking, tinkering, wood carving, rune carving, engineering. Um, just a fantastic resource if for a campaign where you really want to take crafting to the next level. Barry, you're fine there.
Yeah. So in my little foray into the depths of the internet, I came across in the GM's binder the Complete Crafter by Aaron Drake. Now there's an additional book that this guy worked on as well, but it talks about a lot of the similar things. It goes into great detail about materials and where to find them and locations. So it really creates an adventure and some depth to that area of crafting, other than you need spell component and worth 25 GP and this and that, which can get very boring. This helps create that story behind the magic items that you're creating. It really helps you customize your journey. Like, you had to fight a red dragon to get the scales required to make this armor. Now you've got this whole history behind this magic item instead of just finding it in a hoard, which is your generic magic item, right? That's how most people get it. It's in a treasure, and there's no real story behind it. So I think what these books have done is really help create that useful tool to help you create that really in-depth story about your journey to create this magical item that you and your group had to go through to get it. But one of the things that I also stumbled across here was in 3.5, there was a experience point cost. Now, if you play Milestone, you won't have experience points. But I found that in the older and earlier days of Magic crafting, wizards actually had to give up almost a bit of their power into that. So there was a actual cost on their bodies of experience points. So you can imagine, you wanted to create a legendary item, it was going to cost you 50,000 experience points. Well, you could be almost at your next level and then you get this massive setback. So it's not like you're going to run around making magical items all willy-nilly, because there's that experience points cost. And I think in a lot of these newer ones, they've lost that more to a gold piece cost. But I think it'd be really interesting to add some element of that back in the game to help kind of put the reins on crafters going out and making hundreds of items just because they've managed to find a massive amount of gold, to that, like every time you make something, there's a little piece of you going into it. And so there's going to be some negative drawbacks. So I just really thought that was a really cool part of the olden day style that maybe could be brought forward and manipulated a bit and tweaked to the newer styles of play.
Yeah, that's definitely you're definitely paying a price for that magic item for sure. Egan, we gave you a bit of a hall pass on this one since your DM gave you so much crafting homework. So which we will discuss here towards the end. The next sort of topic I wanted to touch on real briefly before we get into a little bit of discussion around homebrew crafting. It's just crafting in game versus crafting downtime. So as I mentioned, our campaign tends to have a lot of moving parts. That's a style we like to play, where it's a very tangled web with a lot of things going on outside of where the characters immediately are. And for our group to just say, oh, we're gonna spend a month hanging out here in Adventure Town to do some crafting, there are a lot of moving pieces that would move a long ways while our group, sort of sat idle. So we in finding our homebrew way to deal with Lafferty's ammunition, we really needed an in-game way to deal with that because our downtime opportunities are a lot less. So what are your thoughts, Barry, around in-game versus? Maybe I'll start with Egan this time since he got a hall pass on the last one.
Yeah, don't let
Egan,
him
what
get
are
off
your
too easy.
what are your thoughts around crafting in-game? Dealing with crafting in-game versus downtime. Maybe you can just touch a little bit on the solution that we've worked out with our homebrew crafting system.
Yeah, I think the first thing that we did was kind of differentiate some of the things that Lafferty was trying to do. In essence, splitting ammo versus creating true magic items and kind of separating those two to allow more in-game. I equated his ammo development, if you will, and what we mean by ammo, he's got sort of like a wrist apparatus as an alchemist. He sort of has all these vials and tubes and whatnot, and he sort of uses almost all of them as a projectile. So
he darts us. Just say it. He darts us all the
healing
time.
word is a dart to the neck. So, and so basically the ammunition was something that we thought would be better set aside and more of a rudimentary, like similar to a ranger fletching an arrow. I kind of used the gunslinger method of making bullets and whatnot that there's sort of like for 50 gold pieces, the quantity they got was, it would last them for quite a bit versus, okay, this is a common magic item. It's going to take him a week to make it just didn't balance out. And so we were able to come up with something that ammo, like he would do his meditation for 4 hours and then he would get to create 1 or 2 pieces of ammo in that extra 4-hour period. There's still rolls. I'm a huge fan of the randomness, and that's the whole reason we play Dungeons and Dragons. So there's a risk, there's a reward. You crit, you get more. You crit fail, it blows up in your face. So I think that's a huge element and the whole fun of doing this. So that's how we did the in-game, where we did a short rest. Okay, roll Lafferty, and let's see if you made such and such a fire bullet or whatnot. Versus the longer term goals that Lafferty has. We have another magic user with Landis that we're trying to create, more of your traditional ring of protections, a cloak, or things like that. That's going to be over, and you'll follow the Anathhars guide a little bit more, and cost. Did you find the right components? Going back to what we talked about with the harvesting. So in game, ammo related or quick items that an alchemist would be able to just pop out almost second nature versus having to study, concentration 100%, also over a much longer period of time, accruing all of the components that you need instead of just being able to create them themselves.
Yeah, I think what's really important to, a really important factor that we had in mind when we were doing this is Lafferty is an artificer, and basically creating things is, they're the blood that keeps them alive, and so we were able to say this should be a fairly routine thing for Lafferty to do to create new ammunition, right? So, Barry, anything you want to add to that? The thoughts there around in-game versus downtime?
Yeah. Like to touch on, I think it was our first video about communication. Just so everybody knows, like you and Egan have been back and forth juggling this around. And it's really important for players and DMs to communicate, to find that balance in the game so that both people are happy. The DM doesn't feel like you're getting too much stuff too easy, and the player doesn't feel like the whole point of his character is kind of being pushed to the wayside and that identity is being lost. So, it just happened to be that Lafferty was an elf. So after he meditates, there's 4 hours in which most of the other players in our party are sleeping. So, you guys were like, well, that seems to be a really good time where Lafferty could pull out his little tools and go away making his bullets and this and that. And with the rolls, it either comes out more potent or less potent. So there's always that kind of, oh, he didn't have Greek fire at that time. So, he pulled out some really strong dwarven brandy and he used that as his flammable liquid for his firebolt. So they won't be as good, but he's still making ammunition. So that part of his character will still be, viable in the game, where if we had to do that in downtime, like Lafferty would never, that key part of that character build would be lost. So it's always a juggling act. It's always a balancing act between players and the DM. And I recommend people watch our first video about the lines of communication and how important they are, because they're key to how we figured this out and how we're working forward in all the other elements in the game that we need to figure out.
Yeah, and I think it's important for a group to look for what I might refer to as non-traditional downtime opportunities. So within our campaign not too long ago, the group traveled from Vargas to Coldhorn. That was 2 days on the ship. There's no reason to say that Lafferty couldn't have found 8 hours a day to be crafting whatever it is he was working on, right? So
Yep.
You've got to look for those situations where there's little pockets of downtime in your game that you may not have thought about immediately as an opportunity to work on this sort of a project, because it can be done as long as you have all the pieces in place. You talked about like a fire, for instance, to be able to do this on, where you can chip away at a project all the time without needing that month of downtime in Adventure Town, right?
If I could make a comment too, Lafferty's especially if you watch the game, he's a busybody. He is not going to be sitting around doing nothing for 8 hours. He is constantly, that's the way I developed the character, or hoping to, is he is constantly looking. In fact, he's almost absent-minded. The other PCs constantly have to, have him pay attention to something besides his notes and his formulas and his tinkering, and he's constantly doing that stuff. So that's character. That's him. Like, those 8 hours are not going to be idle. He cannot do that. He is a busybody. So that's another element, I guess, to the crafting that we're trying to figure out here.
Yes. So as we near the end of this, we want to just touch on Egan, if you want to just sort of talk to the homebrewed system that we used for the ammunition, just as sort of an example of how you can take what's existing out there and mold it. And you've already alluded to the fact this is not how we will craft all magic items. We homebrewed this to deal specifically with Lafferty's ammunition, right?
So basically what we wanted to do, and as an artificer, very limited spell casting slots and whatnot, and we didn't want him to just become a cantrip caster. It's boring for everybody, but we also wanted to make sure that there was not any overpowering. So we had to find a way to allow him to do some other things. So take the ammo. This is really going to be alchemical based. Your fire bullet, let's call it. He also has a glass blowing proficiency, so he creates sort of special bullets made out of glass that, when impact, the reagents could combine, and the explosion or the poison or the acid gets spread out, causing the damage and whatnot. So we wanted to come up with similar to other formulas. Okay, what is the rarity? What is the description? What does it do? Materials needed, proficiencies needed, what materials, CR range. So we again used the formula that was there, but we flavored it how we wanted. And I think the most important thing was the creation time. We thought that it was realistic for Lafferty to create a bullet or two within that 4 hours, assuming the rolls went his way. And then we sort of like from there, you have more potent ammunition like grenades. These take longer, so he would only be able to make one in that time frame. Costs a little bit more. Obviously, a little bit more damage, but maybe higher CR rolls, if you will, or I should say DC rolls. And then, as an aside, outside of the ammo, we're trying to have some fun with his utility, basically creating, I guess we would call them spell bombs or darts or things like that, to where he infuses things with the help of Landis or, by himself, and a less potent version of a spell. Let's take Grease, for example. He would imbue this bomb, if you will, with the grease spell, but instead of its full use, the same radius, the same distance, it was nerfed to be more of a quick, like, toss it and make, instead of a 20-foot radius, it was just 10 feet. And the thought behind it is that he created a quick and dirty solution to, the situation, instead of having to use one of his precious spell slots. So that's kind of how we went about it.
Yeah, and you just sort of touched on it there, but I want to emphasize the fact that, because we really felt that this was, a quick down and dirty sort of artificer skill, we wanted to add in a success failure aspect. So, we created a DC, which is not really normally a part of crafting magic items, where there's a chance on a 1, just outright failure. We picked 20 as the base DC for creation, and we will minus his artificer level from that to come up with the DC. So currently you're level 4, so you'll have a DC 16 to create these things. We haven't finished that yet because I think 16 is a little high. We may have to figure out another modifier we could work in there. And then we set a 20 immediate success, and you double your output. You've just had a fantastic hour of creation there. But we wanted to add that aspect that it wasn't going to be successful every time, because again, you're working on it quickly.
I think we well, maybe we should, but I think we should like use their tools. So if like, if alchemist tools, you have, like, he's proficient, so he'll be able to add that to the DC challenge. So it might be a little bit more balanced than, but I love that idea that it starts at a 20, your artificer level. So him making a bullet in, when he's level 14
should be a breeze. And it makes sense. I mean, he's been making these forever, right? Yeah. So it should be easy.
Yeah.
Very. So we'll kind of wrap things up here. Why don't your last thoughts on crafting magic items in D&D 5e?
Well, my last thoughts of crafting magic items in D&D is don't be afraid to ask your DM about anything. Like, be creative. There's nothing you're going to create in the game magic item wise that's going to destroy or overpower your game. The DM can create something that will negate it, fight it, be equal to it just as easily as you can create it. So don't allow things like that of worrying about balancing the game. That's your DM. He can balance the game quite easily. All it takes is one beholder in that damn anti-magic ray, and all of your magic items are useless. So just be creative. Don't be afraid to try it. Start simple and enjoy the process. It can be a lot of fun and add a lot of really cool elements to character creation in your game.
Yeah. Egan, last thoughts around crafting?
Yeah, I think Barry nailed it. It if you communicate with your DM, it could add so much flavor, so much fun to it, without weighing it down. And I know that's been our biggest challenge, mine as well. Like, I didn't want to burden the game with, hey, Colin, can I try this? And it's like, when do we do it? And all that. So if you communicate, you find some balance. Barry, I'm going to steal this from you, bud. He had an amazing idea to mitigate some of the time it takes is to create not just an interdimensional, but like a time, like a Fae. You go to the Fae to create something, a week passes there and only a day passes there. So we're having fun with it. And I think Barry nailed it. Have fun with it. Communicate with your DM. They want you to do cool stuff. I mean, at the end of the day, maybe we come up with a magic item that everybody wants to use. How cool would that be? So have at it.
Yeah. So I'm going to definitely add in on the communication piece. I think that a lot of campaigns may not think about magic item crafting until you sort of get to that point. So, there may need to be a point where out of game, the DM just brings the group together and says, okay, here's how we're going to deal with crafting magic items. Everybody cool with that? Is there anything we want to adjust? And just, make sure everyone understands, okay, we have some crafting opportunities that you said you want to explore. Let's flesh this out like Egan and I are doing right now with Lafferty stuff, and then we'll have a way to move forward in the game. And I think crafting adds a fantastic element to the game. It's one thing to go out and find a magic sword. That's very cool. It's also very cool to say you quest for the materials and find a way to craft your own magic sword. And I mean, that will make for some amazing story opportunities. The same way that going out and fighting a dragon for one would, right? So
I thought for sure Egan was going to tell people to stay away from the Artificer. It's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work. I will tell you, you got to put in some time outside of it, but thoroughly enjoyable. I did not realize how much fun you could have, but it's a testament though to our DM because
it's my first Artificer as well. It's been that is a side adventure just for Egan and I.
We've had a whole side quest that we didn't tape or anything, but it is key though, because if you have a DM that shuts the door, then I could see an Artificer not being as fun to play. If it's strictly by the book and you have your 3 spell slots, have fun being a cantrip caster, because that's basically what you're going to do. But no, this has been fantastic.
All right. So with that, gentlemen, I think we'll wrap up episode 3 of Roll by Roll's Tavern Talk. So we hope that everyone's enjoyed tonight's topic. Our tavern talks occur on Thursdays after each of our Saturday night Adventures in Emathan session. Now, our next Adventures in Emathan session is next Thursday. So we will do our tavern talk the Thursday after that. So like a week later. Summer scheduling's been a bit rough, so we're taking an opportunity next Thursday to play. For those of you that may be watching this video on YouTube, please support us by making sure to like our videos and subscribe to the channel. If you hit that little bell icon, you'll be alerted whenever we make another video, and that will be both for our Adventures in Emathan campaign and our Tavern Talk videos. So, gentlemen, as we always do, we'll end the session with a little cheers. Hopefully you've got something you can put up there.
I have an invisible bottle.
An invisible bottle. Egan, do you have to get your empty glass? Oh, there we go. All right.
Nice.
Cheers, gentlemen. Thanks very much for a wonderful session. And we will sign out until next time. Thanks, guys.